Hello, everyone. As Steve mentioned last night, we're in the process of adopting a 6-year-old little girl. And our boys, we've got 2 boys, are 15 and 13. So it's been a while since I've been reading little kids' stories. But over the last few weeks, I've pulled out a few of my old favorites that were stored in a box, ready to be given away. And they're now in good use again. But one of my favorite stories is the story of the Velveteen Rabbit. And I'd like to read a little excerpt from that story today. "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day, when they were lying side by side near the nursery fender, before Nana came to tidy the room. "Does it mean having things that buzz inside you and a stick-out handle?" "Real isn't how you are made," said the skin horse. "It's a thing that happens to you when a child loves you for a very long, long time, not just to play with you, but really loves you, then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the skin horse, for he was always truthful. "When you are real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being wound up?" he asked, "or bit by bit?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the skin horse. "You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily, or have sharp edges, or have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand. There is nothing on earth quite like real, genuine love. And love is the most incredible agent of change. We've just heard beautiful stories of lives that were changed because of love. Love is powerful and it makes us real. We've got our very own example of not the Velveteen Rabbit or the skin horse, but our boy Ethan, who's now 13 and would probably be embarrassed by me showing you this photo. But when he was little, he had Chocolate the bear, and Chocolate the bear still lives on in our house, although Chocolate the bear is now in the top of the cupboard. But Chocolate the bear, I think, literally had 1 or 2 eyes rubbed off by the time Ethan was finished loving on Chocolate the bear. Love really does change us forever. When I was 14 years old, my family were looking for a church to join, and my dad and mum started attending actually One Life Church, which was NCF Church back then. And I remember my dad saying to me as a 14-year-old girl, "You should come to church. There are really nice boys there. You might meet a nice boy." And to be really honest, that was one of the reasons that I first came to church, because that sounded great as a 14-year-old girl. And I did find my husband at church, but in those first few months of joining the church, I remember regularly on a Sunday morning being completely overwhelmed by the love of God. And it didn't really matter what anyone was preaching about or what anyone said. I'm sure the preachers were great. They're probably still sitting in this room, but it didn't matter if they were preaching about going to the nations. What I heard was God's love. And I remember often crying after a service, and I think it was that God had just so captivated my heart with his love. The only real thing that changes the human heart, God's love. And I very quickly didn't get distracted by all the boys that were around, and there were quite a few, because I had found genuine, real love, and it changed my life forever. And some of the decisions that I made during that season of being captivated by God's love for the first time properly in my life, I still live with the heritage of those decisions. I still live in I want to say consequences, but that sounds negative. I live in some of the fruit of the decisions I made being captivated by Jesus. And when we make decisions out of a love for God and out of his love captivating us, our lives follow a pattern, and we can find God's goodness and his fruitfulness. And I've really felt that God's love changed the direction of my life as a 14-year-old girl, and I never understood then. I look back now, and I'm sure when I'm 80, I'll hopefully look back and see the goodness of God, and the Bible promises us that because of his love that changes our hearts. A little while ago, I was feeling discouraged because I'd said goodbye to quite a few friends of mine that were moving overseas to find a safe place and a good education for their children. And I said to Steve the one day, I feel like I'm like the Christmas elf. I keep going, our country's not that bad, and I love our country, and my children are happy, and, just trying to paint the picture of the other side, because I felt like I had quite a few conversations of doom and gloom, and it was troubling me. And then I drove out of church one Sunday, and my feelings didn't improve because I normally leave church quite late because we try and chat to people after the meeting, and they're lovely people to connect with. But that morning, I left church early. And Steve had preached something that morning about putting others first and loving others. And I drove out of the church parking lot, and I stopped, and my oldest son was next to me. And the first car drove out the gate, didn't let us through. The second car drove out the gate, didn't let us through. 5 or 6 cars later, eventually someone said, "You can go." And I looked at my son, and he had actually noticed and started laughing at the fact that we just heard someone preaching about putting others first. And I just started to think, what hope is there for the world if we can't even be kind to each other in the church parking lot? And these are the Christians. These are the people that are going to church, who should know the love of Christ, who should know God. And I sound terrible about our church. It's really a lovely place, and there are lots of lovely people. But I felt God bring me back to this idea of his great love, and that actually, with every single problem that we face and every single situation, the way God works is through his love breaking into people's hearts. And when he breaks into hearts, he changes us. And we are never the same again. And he changes situations, and he changes our communities, and he changes our countries. And it's all through his love. And I started to pray, not just for God's love to break in, but for a revolution of love. That we don't just have good ideas, that we don't just pray that God breaks in, but that we're part of the change, that we're part of his love in action in our community. There are quite a few definitions for this word revolution, but the one I like the best is a definite, radical change or turnaround. A definite, radical change or turnaround. The word revolution is not a passive, weak word. It involves action. It's about a determination to not just talk about change, but to be part of the change. Jesus was so good at bringing change wherever he went. He challenged his disciples, he challenged the Pharisees, and he challenges us in so many stories in the Bible on how we love and who we love and why we love others. Luke chapter 6, verse 27, Jesus says, "But I say to you who hear, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you, and pray for those who abuse you." The love that Jesus demonstrates is radical. It goes against the grain, and it stretches us beyond our comfort zone. We'll never change the world if we only love those who are lovely. We'll never change the world if we only love those who are like us, or those who believe exactly what we believe. The world will never change, and his love will not bring about a revolution. Jesus was known for his love for sinners. He had a reputation for choosing mercy over judgment. Jesus should be the lens that we view others through. His example is the one that we should follow in how we treat other people, in how we love other people. I'd like to look at a story from John chapter 8, where Jesus demonstrates his love in the most profound and beautiful way. John chapter 8, verse 2, it says, "At dawn, he, Jesus, appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him. and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and he said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." It's a beautiful story, but it's completely contradictory to the culture at the time, to what the law had said. Jesus challenged the accusers, and he challenges every single one of us through the story. There are two aspects I'd like to look at. The one is the accusers. According to the law, they were right. They were completely justified, and no flies on them. They had caught that woman in the act of adultery. But their main aim for making a spectacle of this woman wasn't because they wanted justice served. It was because they wanted to trap Jesus. They wanted to catch Jesus siding with a sinner. They must have known that Jesus was known for mercy instead of judgment, and they thought this was an opportune moment. And at first, Jesus seems to ignore them. He draws in the sand, and I can imagine the tension building, because here's this woman. She knows she's guilty. She's probably feeling humiliated. She's probably feeling full of shame. And there are all these accusers standing around her. And this atmosphere of guilt and shame and condemnation must have just built while Jesus is drawing in the sand. And then he says to them, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." Jesus is so clever because he shifts their attention from the actions of this woman to the attitudes of their heart. I don't know about you, but there have been so many times when, maybe it's just me, where I've had accusations and I've pointed out to Jesus just where somebody else has fallen short. Sometimes my poor husband, he's the one I'm telling Jesus about. Did he not realize? Have you not seen, Lord? What's going on here? And very often in those moments, it's like Jesus just shifts the attention, says, "Let's not talk about him for a moment. What's going on in your heart?" There's a quote by David Fishman, I think that's how you say it, that I love. It says, "The size of a person's ego can be measured by how they can handle the mistakes of others." When we judge others, when we criticize others, when we look down on others, when we isolate ourselves from others because of an offense in our hearts, we get in the way of love. Instead of being catalysts of change, instead of bringing about a love revolution in our community, we become stone throwers. Our hands are too full of stones to be able to extend hands of love. I remember at high school, I've just told you that I really got overwhelmed and totally captivated by God's love, but I think I went about trying to change the world in a completely incorrect way, and a whole lot of it came across as very judgmental. I somehow made it to becoming a prefect in our school, I think because I was so bossy. And I remember the other prefects, some of the guys putting up the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition photos in the prefect's room. And me, being a good Christian girl, I decided to tell those boys exactly how bad swimsuit bikini girls were. And so I went on a little rant. And do you know that years after high school, I bumped into one of those guys. And you know what he remembered about me? It wasn't the love of Jesus. It wasn't that I'd invited him to church even. What he remembered about me was that I made such a stink about his swimsuit, Sports Illustrated pictures that he had stuck on the prefect's wall. Do you know that there's another guy, and he's probably sitting in this building. He was our head boy, Ryan Calder. And he went and did things completely differently to me. And I really, in hindsight, I look back and I think I could have learned something from Ryan Calder, because he showed the love of God without judgment. Judging others doesn't define them, it defines us. Love opens doors. Judgment on others only ever closes doors. We can't change the world while we're judging others like these accusers were. The second person I'd like to look at in the story is the woman. This woman arrived with a whole lot of accusers around her, and one by one, they all leave, and she's left with just Jesus. Now, sometimes I think to be left with just Jesus, when I know that I've messed up and that I'm full of sin and I've done something wrong, would be quite a scary thing. But for her, what a profound moment, because Jesus is full of mercy and he's full of love. Jesus doesn't ignore sin. He says to this woman, go now and leave your life of sin. He knows she sinned. He knows she's messed up. She arrived accused, guilty, and humiliated. And without changing one single thing, she leaves forgiven, accepted, and if she wanted, she could leave completely free of the life that she had brought with her. Sadly, for a lot of us, we don't even need accusers around us. We're holding stones, but those stones are pointed towards us. We can get so caught up in our own mistakes, in our own mess-ups. We can be carrying around stones and beating ourselves up. And instead of living free and looking outwards at how we can love others and extend the love of Jesus to others, we're so embarrassed about ourselves. We can walk around with our heads hung low, ashamed, when God has clearly given us a door to freedom. He's forgiven us, and yet we're beating ourselves up. Romans 8 verse 1 says, therefore, there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. When we really believe this verse, it impacts how we see ourselves, and it impacts how we judge and see others. Colossians 3 verse 14 says, above all else, put on love. This verse indicates a choice. We get to choose to put on love, and we get to choose to love others. We get to choose whether we accept God's forgiveness and his freedom, and whether we live in that, or whether we carry on walking around carrying stones that we're throwing at others and that we're throwing at ourselves. I'm no theologian, but I recently heard a definition of agape love, the love that God loves us with. And I just thought it was amazing. It says a discriminating affection that involves choice and selection. This doesn't mean he loves me more than he loves you. It means he loves me and he loves you because that's what he's chosen to do. He's chosen to love us so that when the accuser comes, and when our thoughts get in our heads about what we've done wrong and how we've messed up and how we don't deserve God's love and grace, God is saying, whoa, 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 step back. I love her. I've chosen to love her. She's mine. I love him. I've chosen to love him. I love him with agape, unconditional love. So those stones that were on your chairs have different words written on them. I don't know if you want to look for them. Some of you wouldn't have got because we actually ran out of stones. I think that means you don't have anything to deal with, because those stones had words on. But I wonder if you wouldn't mind just standing up with me with those stones. If you've got one, if you haven't, you can just pretend. Okay, so here's my encouragement. Are you all still there? Here's my encouragement to every single one of us. Is if you've come in to equip, or there's something in your heart, as we've heard the stories of these women, or as we've looked at the story of Jesus with this woman and the accusers that came to accuse her, there might be stones that you're carrying that you've been pointing in someone else's direction, and there might be stones that you're carrying that you've been feeling shame and condemnation for yourself. Here's my encouragement that on the count of 3, we drop those stones. Are you up for that? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Awesome. Thank you.